Rory, really nice to talk to you. You're in Dublin. It's the evening there. It's morning here in New Zealand. How are you doing?
I am good. Very much looking forward to getting to New Zealand in that, because we've had about 10 days of -5 degrees, 6, 7, -7. And it's just kind of warmed up since yesterday, but it's still absolutely bloody freezing. So bring on the antipodes.
I do want to talk about your show in a minute, but I've been really curious looking into your history and your work, and I'm really fascinated to know, when did Panti first kind of appear for you, and what was her evolution, I guess?
Well, I first started getting into drag nonsense when I was an art student in the mid to late-ish 80s. But it was all just, in a sort of a stupid art student nonsense late night way. It was also very underground at the time, especially here. Like, at that stage, homosexuality was still a criminal offense in this country. Like, which is just so nuts.
Yeah.
But when I finished art college, I ran out of Dublin, because at the time I thought, oh my God, I hate this place. It's so small-minded and backwards and all these things. And I thought, I want to go to the biggest city in the world and all this kind of stuff. And I thought, right, I'm going to Tokyo. So off I went. And I had no intentions of doing drag there or anything. I thought I was going to have a very normal young person exploring the world life. But one of the very first people I met there was an American queen from Atlanta, Georgia, which is kind of one of the spiritual homes of drag. And we ended up doing a double act together. So what I'd been doing in Dublin as an art student was very artsy, nutty, completely out of the box nonsense, and which was fun and all. But by the time I got to Japan, I had this other idea of a kind of something I wanted to do, which is quite largely based on our glamorous American aunt, who would sort of come home every few Christmases, in pantsuits and smoking menthol cigarettes and jangling with all this sort of jewelry and everything. And sort of Panti is sort of amalgamation of her. And I don't know if you know the movie The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, Maggie Smith won the Oscar for it in 1969. Like, it's still my favorite movie. I love everything about it. The character's incredible. What she wears, her clothes, her looks, the way she talks, everything. So Panti, as a sort of a proto version of Panti as I know her now, appeared in Japan at that time based on those two influences, and a bit of Dolly Parton thrown in.
So how would you describe her personality? Because there's a whole load of different kinds of drag personalities. Is fundamentally, is she kind? Is she nurturing?
She's very warm. She's very warm. A lot of people in Ireland over the years would call her Auntie Panti. She's warm, but she's, she can throw shade if she wants. I mean, she's funny, she's smart, but she's very warm, and all of the jokes are understood to be, not mean-hearted or anything. But yeah.
So in terms of you as Rory, how much of Rory comes out in her, and how much does she give you license to explore aspects that are maybe not so strong in Rory?
There's a lot of her and me and her. I come from the classic gay drag tradition, where the line between the performance and the performer is very blurred. And that is mostly just due to the fact that, when you're a young drag queen working in gay nightclubs and all that kind of thing, you are interacting with the same people every week. You're interacting with your friends, people who go to that bar or club very regularly. You're getting taxis running from one place to another. And when people bump into you and they say, oh, hey, how are you? Or, oh, I hear your mother wasn't well. They want real responses. They don't want responses from someone who's not a real person. And so, the line between Panti and Rory is almost necessarily very blurred. And, most of certainly my queer friends call me Panti all the time.
I was going to ask you about that. Yeah.
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 And that's the funny thing about drag queens from that kind of, particular kind of drag that I come from. We have no problem with you calling us by our drag name all the time. But if I have spent 3 hours getting ready, creating this illusion very carefully, and then I'm walking through a nightclub and you go, "How you, Rory?" Like, oh, I'll be pissed off. So it's very different.
There was one more kind of question generally about drag, and I think for the queer community, drag has become more than just entertainment. In many respects, you become icons and almost touchstones. You mentioned people calling you auntie, and I think that these roles take on a different thing for the community. Have you noticed a reverence for that, and maybe how people come to you? Do they talk about their problem? That kind of thing, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. I mean, they absolutely do, but in some ways, I think that has changed a lot recently. I think drag queens, first of all, they're very visible members of the queer community. So drag queens, never had, certainly when they're working in that, they never had the opportunity to pass as straight, even when it was very difficult to be out in the world as an openly queer person. So they maybe understandably developed a feistiness about them. And on top of that, within the community, they tend to be the ones, and have for a long time, that are on the stage in the back of the bar with a microphone in their hand. And so almost by default, they became a type of spokesperson for the community simply by dint of the practical fact that their voice was physically louder and they were more visible. And then I think for a lot of drag queens, certainly I and other ones that I know, then felt a sort of responsibility to be careful or to be particular about using that voice on behalf of the community, and to use it actively, to think about how it was being used. And so I think that has always been there in the queer community for drag queens. There is also this thing, you kind of hinted at it there, that people tend to be very open with drag queens. For years I used to work on the doors of nightclubs and that. And the things that drunk people would tell me, things that they often hadn't told anybody else ever, like things that they felt, my own reading of it always was that they were prepared to tell a drag queen things that they felt other people would judge them for, because they feel like, oh, this bloke in a dress in public, just whatever, smoking his menthol cigarette, when he's not meant to be smoking inside, whatever. And then, this queen isn't going to judge me. And so they feel very relaxed about telling you things, whatever. But I will say that some of that has changed. And this actually touches on what a lot of the show is about. It used to be, when I got into drag, every single drag queen got into it by accident, because nobody imagined for a single moment that drag would pay your bills. You got into drag then because it was stupid, it was fun, it was punk, it was two fingers to everybody, it was transgressive, it was confronting, it was outrageous fun, and you might get a few quid and a few free drinks. The job was basically to get, drunk for free and run around making a show of yourself. And but then that has changed in the last 10, 15 years dramatically in ways that we could never have anticipated, because of the success of things like RuPaul's Drag Race and all that. And I would say, your neighbors played some bit of a role in that, because I sort of marked the beginning of a change, maybe with Priscilla and that kind of thing, where drag was sort of dragged into the mainstream. But what it means is in the last 10 years now, young queer kids, they actually decide that they want to become drag queens, and they want to because they see drag queens on the television being famous and making lots of money. And that is so wild, to someone of my age. It's such a huge change. And so, I think drag has always been inherently political, whether the drag queens knew it themselves or not. It was. And now I think it's less political, because now it has become, a somewhat of a legitimate career in and of itself, completely divorced from whether the drag queen has any political, thoughts or ambitions about it. So it's a very different drag world.
And yet it is becoming politicized again. The protests at Drag Queen Storytime, the rollback of stuff in America. So it's almost, again, a lightning rod for the machinations of politics.
at the moment, I sometimes find myself thinking that I'm glad I'm the age I am, because I think this sort of rolling back and, anti-queer stuff must have come as quite a shock to somebody who's around 25 or 30, because we had this kind of glorious little period where it's really felt like we were overcoming these things and we were so close to having achieved everything. And so I think for somebody around that age, it must have come as quite a shock the last, say, 5-7 years, whatever it's been, to suddenly be on the sharp end of all of this kind of far right nonsense and everything. Whereas part of me is like, oh yeah, I know what this is. I've been through all this before. I fully remember this. I'm prepared. I know how to get through this.
There's something to be said for experience, because it's 10 years on since Pantigate, where you made this impassioned plea for marriage equality, or defence of marriage equality. And Ireland, certainly in the 21st century, has seen huge transformations. It was very Roman Catholic, very buttoned down, and is now world leading in a lot of this stuff. And you were involved in that process. So there is something about, no matter how old we get, remembering that we can be elders and stand up for our community, offer advice, whatever it is, as we get older, because that generational stuff is really important.
Yeah, like, what you say is true. I grew up in this very grey, economically depressed, socially backward country that was trying to sort of get out from under the yoke of the Catholic Church, really. When this country got its independence, it's really not that long ago, it was easy for politicians at the time, when the country was very poor and everything, to just cede to the Catholic Church a lot of power because they had money. So the Catholic Church took over all schooling in this country and they still have a huge say in that. And it took a lot of scandals and other things for this country to start shaking off the influence of the Catholic Church. But when it happened incredibly quickly. So the country that I fled after our college was grey and miserable and backwards as far as I was concerned. And I thought then that as a queer person, I would never, ever be able to make, a comfortable, happy home in this country. This country hated me at the time. But Ireland is small, and I think that is one of its strengths. And that allowed it to change incredibly quickly and incredibly dramatically. And the country that Ireland is now is absolutely unrecognizable from the one that I left in 1990. And things like, Ireland became the first country in the world to introduce marriage equality through a popular vote. And that was transformative for this country, because not only, did it sort of say, oh, look how far, this point we've reached in making up our own minds about things. It also, I think Irish people were like, wait, are we progressive now? It was almost like a shock to us to find out that we are one of the most progressive countries in the world, but it happened so fast and so really, and the population here is still incredibly young. It always had, I think it's something like 50% of the population is under the age of 25 or something. And even when how the country looks now is so different than, 1990, and the cities look different. We never had any immigration until the 90s. And now I live in a part of the city that only 36% in the last, census ticked white and Irish, the boring boxes that I ticked. And, so this country has gone through a dramatic transformation, and it is a much better country, a more exciting country, a more welcoming country, a more colorful country. It's just a much, much vastly better place than it ever was. And I came back here in 1995, basically to visit family. But when I came back, already I could see the changes happening in front of me, and I ended up staying. And now I couldn't imagine living anywhere else. And I think, the countries generally, like every country, we all give out about our own things and bitch and moan about all sorts. But in general, we've done really well. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Well, you've sprinkled little bits about the show in our talk, so I don't think I need to ask you anything specific. It's been fantastic to talk to you. I'm looking forward to you coming down here next month. And all the best, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Bye.